Hey guys, this last section is very similar to what we just did with the equations, but there's some slight changes towards the end of it because we're going to be dealing with inequalities now instead of equations. Okay, so we're going to solve some polynomial inequalities, take you back a little bit to similar things to what we did in Chapter 2 last semester, but a little bit more complicated. So, like I said, same steps at the beginning. Okay, you got to set the equation equal to 0. And then factor the other side, all that's the same. Right? But once you get to the zero product rule, in order to get the answer, you're going to have to deal with it a little bit differently because zero product rule changes with an inequality instead of an equation. Okay, so if you think about it this way, if your sign is greater than, right, if a times b, your two things multiplied by each other, is greater than 0, then a and b have to have the same sign. Right? They either both have to be positive or both have to be negative in order for the answer to be greater than 0. If it's less than 0, okay, then they have to have different signs. One has to be positive, one has to be negative. Right? I think that's kind of intuitive, but that'll help us when we just have two things that we are factoring. Okay? Now, if it gets bigger than 2, for more than two factors, if you have 3 or more factors, the zero product rule is going to change again. Okay, so if you have a times b times c times d times whatever, however many things, if it's greater than 0, then you're going to have an even number of negative factors. Okay, so that means that you have to have exactly 0 or 2 or 4 or 6 or however many negative factors in order to come out with a positive answer. Okay, and if it's supposed to be less than 0, then you have to have an odd number of negative factors. Okay, and if you think about that, it's going to make sense because the positive ones you don't really worry about. That just keeps the sign the way it is. Every negative factor that you add, it's going to change the sign again. Okay, so it'll start positive, and then you have to add a negative factor. It'll go to negative, and then back to positive, and then negative, and back to positive. That makes sense. Okay, in order to solve these, we're going to have to use a sign chart or a sign graph. So we'll have to graph all of these different things on a number line, and I'll show you how to do that in the examples. So we have five examples here. We have to find and graph the solution set. Okay, so we've got y squared minus 3y is less than or equal to 0. Okay, so we can factor this first. We've already got the 0 there, so we're good there. We just got to factor it. So we got y times y minus 3 less than or equal to 0. So because we want these to be less than or equal to 0, then that means that these two terms over here, or these two factors, have to have opposite signs. Okay, so either we have to have y is less than or equal to 0, and y minus 3 is greater than or equal to 0, okay, in which case y has to be greater than or equal to 3. Now, is there any time, ask yourself, is there any time that you can have y less than or equal to 0 and greater than or equal to 3? No, that doesn't make any sense. Right? You can't be both less than 0 and greater than 3. So that's no solution, okay, for that case. Well, you could flip it, though, and have it the other way. Right? You could have y be the one greater than 0. And we need greater than or equal to, because that's what it is in the problem. And y minus 3 less than or equal to 0. So y is greater than or equal to 0 stays the same, and y is less than or equal to 3. Does that make sense? It does make sense. Okay, so the solution set here would just be 0 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 3. Okay, so y has to be between 0 and 3. And to graph that, of course, we put our 0 on here and our 3, both closed circles, and fill in the graph in between. Okay, and of course you can plug those numbers in or use a calculator to check to make sure you get the right answer. Second problem here. 36 is less than x squared. Right? Now what I would do is you're going to want that x squared to be positive, right? You definitely don't want it to be negative, so I'm going to subtract the 36 over, and it takes 0 is less than x squared minus 36. Okay? It's just easier to do it that way. Alright, I always want my x squared positive. You could flip it to the other side if that's just going to make you feel better. X squared minus 36, right? But x squared minus 36, remember, is greater than 0. Okay, or 0 is less than x squared minus 36. Okay, and then factor this. It's a difference of two squares. So x plus 6, x minus 6 is greater than 0. Okay, because it's greater than 0, that means that either both have to be positive or both have to be negative. Okay, so we can set x plus 6 greater than 0, x minus 6 greater than 0. Alright, is it going to work? Well, we've got x is greater than negative 6, and x is greater than positive 6. Okay, so does that make sense? Yes, the solution set here would just be the, remember this is an AND problem, I have to have both of them. Right, so x has to be greater than positive 6. Okay, that would be the solution set for that part. Well, we could try the other way. X plus 6 is less than 0, and x minus 6 is less than 0. Okay, so when you solve these, we've got x is less than negative 6, and x is less than positive 6. Okay, so for this one, it's going to be negative 6. Okay, so our final answer is going to be this solution set. X is either less than negative 6 or it's greater than positive 6. So to graph it, we've got our 0, our 6, our negative 6. Alright, we have open circles at both of them. And x either has to be bigger than the 6 or smaller than the negative 6. Now, number 3. We have 4k squared minus 8k is greater than 0. Okay, so let's factor this right away. You can pull out the shared is the 4k. You're left with a k here minus 2. It's greater than 0. Okay, so they got to be the same sign once again. Alright, so since they have to be the same sign, we've got 4k is greater than 0, k minus 2 greater than 0. Right? Remember that these have to be AND problems because you need both in order to be true. You need both of them to be greater in order for this to be true. So k is greater than 0 and k is greater than 2. Alright, so the only time that both happens is when, in fact, k is greater than 2. In the other case, 4k is less than 0 and k minus 2 is less than 0. Okay, so k is less than 0, k is less than 2. The only time that's going to be true is when k is less than 0. So these are our two cases. K has to either be less than 0 or greater than 2. Graph it. 0, 2. Open circles at both. Less than 0, greater than 2. That's the solution set. Number 4 here. Okay, so for number 4 we have a little bit more complicated of a problem. Alright, so we'll start with, we're going to have to, in order to, you can't subtract that y minus 1 over, you're not going to be able to do much factoring there, so we need to FOIL before we do anything else. So we've got y squared. This is just a difference of two squares, luckily, so it makes it easy for us. Y squared minus 1 is less than y plus 1. Okay, so we could subtract the 1 and the y over, so we'll get y squared minus y minus 2 is less than 0. Now we can factor, and we've got y and y. Okay, we'll have a minus 2 plus 1 is less than 0. Alright, so since it's less than 0, remember if it's less than 0, if we need this answer to be negative, we need those to have opposite signs. So case 1 here is where y plus 1 is less than 0, but y minus 2 is greater than 0. Okay, so we could solve these. So y has to be less than negative 1, and y has to be greater than 2. Does that make sense? It's never going to happen. You're never going to have y less than negative 1 and greater than positive 2, so that's no solution for that one. If we go the other route, y plus 1 is greater than 0, y minus 2 is less than 0. Okay, then we'll have y is greater than negative 1 and y is less than positive 2, which does make sense. We can rewrite this as negative 1 is less than y, which is less than 2. Okay, and to graph it, we have our 0, our negative 1, our positive 2, open circles, and fill in between them. All done. Alright, last problem here. This is where we got the sign chart involved. Okay, so we've got a little sign chart is going to be needed because our factoring is a little more complicated. So we can start by taking out the y. Y squared minus 16 on the inside still. So now you see a difference of two squares. We can factor that again to y plus 4, y minus 4. It's all got to be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, now we have three terms. So that tells us that we have to have either 0 or two negative numbers. all right, out of these three things, either 0 or 2. So you could go case by case all the way through with all of them being greater than 0, and then just pick 2 to be less than 0 and 1 to be greater than, and keep going, keep going, keep going. That's just a lot of cases. It's going to be 4 different cases or something like that. So instead, I suggest you just graph all of these as a sign chart. So I'll show you what that looks like. So the graph of y is going to look like this. Okay? At 0, it's going to be 0, right? So at 0, it's going to be 0, and anything bigger than 0, it's going to be positive. Anything less than 0, it's going to be negative, right? That makes sense to you. All right, y plus 4, that graph, okay, the 0 is not at 0. The 0 is over at 4. Oh, sorry, negative 4. Oh, I'm doing that wrong. Hold on. Let me fix it. I can fix it. Okay. Over here at negative 4, that's where the 0 is. Okay? So that's where, up here, the 0 is at 0. And the second one, your 0 is going to be at negative 4. Right? Anything less than that, your answer is going to be negative. Anything bigger than that, the answer is going to be positive. And lastly, with your y minus 4, okay, your 0 is going to be all the way over at 4. Okay, so that's the 0. Everything greater than that's positive. Everything less than that is negative. Okay, talking about what the answer is going to be, right? If you plug in negative 4 to that second equation, that second inequality here, right? If you plug in negative 4 here, you're going to get 0. That's why I got the 0. All right, anything bigger than that, you're going to have a positive answer. Anything smaller than that, you're going to have a negative answer. Same for these other ones. Okay, so now we could just pick out all the times where you're going to have positives, where you're going to have 0 or 2 negatives. Okay, so over here, the important places to look on this are going to be obviously at negative 4, 0, and positive 4. Okay, those are where things start to change. Okay, so what that tells us is what's going on here. Well, let's look at these different sections here. Okay, so if we are over here in the negative, past negative 4, to the left of negative 4, all three of these are negative. Okay, so that means that's not going to work. That area is not going to work. In the middle here, we've got negative, positive, negative. Okay, because of that, that is going to work. So this section is going to be a good section, this from negative 4 to 0. Over in the 0 to 4 section, right here, we've got positive, positive, negative. So the whole thing is going to be negative. That's not going to help us. And lastly, greater than 4, all are positive, so that will be good. All right, so our graph of, our final graph here, right, we're going to have, we've got closed circles because it's greater than or equal to. Okay, we're going to have a closed circle here. Anytime you add 0, right, we're going to be equal to 0, so those are going to be your closed circles. So at negative 4, you're going to have a closed circle. At 0, you're going to have a closed circle. And at 4, you're going to have a closed circle. Okay, because those are all our zeros. Now, the parts that we're going to fill in, I'll do it in a different color so you can see. Okay, you're going to fill in wherever it's going to be positive. And we just found that it's going to be positive here, and it's going to be positive over here. Okay, so that's going to be our final solution set. You could write it as either negative 4 is less than y is less than, equal to 0, or y is greater than or equal to 4. Okay, that would be the solution set. That would be the graph. I know that's complicated. We'll work on it in class. Don't worry about it too much, and we'll get going on it.